there was a slight problem, so Lisbeth will present first.
Yes. So it's actually maybe not the real logic thing to have me first, because the project of Valentin is actually a project before my project. But anyway, I think it will work. My name is Lisbeth van Hoof. I'm working for Hydrogennet, Waterstofnet in Dutch. We are an organization realizing sustainable hydrogen projects, mainly in Flanders and the Netherlands. And we are involved in different European hydrogen projects, such as 3Emotion. For 3Emotion, we are responsible for the dissemination. As you can see here on the slide, 3Emotion is the fourth fuel cell bus demonstration project of the fuel cell and hydrogen joint undertaking. So high velocity is the third one, and it's the one that Valentin will talk about. It's high velocity is almost at the end of the project, so they can have present you final results. I can present you intermediate results of the 3Emotion project. So what was the objective of what is the objective of 3Emotion? It's to bridge the gap between current demonstration projects and larger scale deployment of fuel cell buses. And how do we do it? We do it by geographical expansion and by setting new bus targets. In 3Emotion we have 5 sites, actually 7 PTOs, and we have 29 fuel cell buses, of which 21 are new, and 8 are existing buses that are deployed longer. There are 3 new HRIs and 2 updates of refueling infrastructure, but I come back to that later. Who are the partners of the 3Emotion project? The partners are public transport operators, regional organizations, an HRS builder and a bus manufacturer, a research institute, that evaluates the data, and then Waterstofnet is responsible for the dissemination of the project. What are the objectives of the 3Emotion project? It's to further reduce the hydrogen consumption of the buses. It's to reduce the cost of the hydrogen production, to reduce the total cost of ownership of the buses, increase overall operational availability, increase the bus lifetime, and to introduce articulated buses on hydrogen. So which are the demonstration sites? We have demonstrations in Rotterdam. In Rotterdam it's 2 PTOs. We have demonstrations in London, in Versailles, in Pau, in France, and Aalborg in Denmark. But I come back to the sites immediately. And where are we now? So these are the intermediate results I want to talk to you about. The only sites where the buses are already operational are the ones in London and in Rotterdam. In London and Rotterdam, RET. RET is the public transport operator. So where are we now? First, I want to go to the London site. London is one of the cities that has already some years of experience with hydrogen buses. They were in the CHIC project. As you could see on my first slide, it's one of the first projects of the joint undertaking on buses. The buses are refueling at the Air Product Station. It's a troop trailer station, and it's operational since 2011 with an availability of over 99%, which is actually great. In the Tree Emotion project, 8 ride buses that are operational since 2011 are refurbished and they continue their route at the moment. And Tree Emotion also introduced 2 new Van Hol buses with Ballard fuel cells, and they are operational since January 2018. Together, all the buses drove more than 2 million kilometers, of which more than 40,000 for the new buses. The availability of the buses is about 80%. London introduced a new project. There was a press release in the beginning of this week in which they introduced that they will be part of the next fuel cell bus project of the joint undertaking, which is Chive. And they will deploy the 21st double-deck buses starting from next year. Then for Rotterdam, in the Tree Emotion project, 2 Van Hol buses are driving in Rotterdam since October 2017. They refuel at a public air liquide station. This hydrogen comes from the hydrogen pipeline between Antwerp and Rotterdam. Together they drove now more than 100,000 kilometers. And I asked the manager of RET for his first experiences. And passengers and drivers, they're really enthusiastic about the buses because they're silent and they're comfortable. Besides the HRS, there are no investments needed in charging infrastructure, nor adaptations in deployment, for example, charging time during services. And the buses can be used for long distance or services with over 300 kilometers a day. In the beginning there were some teething issues with buses, but they are solved now. And of course, the total cost of ownership of the buses and infrastructure are still a lot more compared to diesel, but hopefully it will change in the future. Then I want to present you these buses which are part of the Tree Emotion project. It's also for Rotterdam, but it's in the province of Rotterdam, in the province of South Holland. So the buses that I just told you about are city buses, and these are intercity buses. They refuel at the same station, but they're a new type of buses. They are for VDL buses, and as you can see, they have a special hydrogen fuel cell module behind the bus. Normally they should have been in operation yet, but it took a bit longer to get a license plate because of the new concept of the buses. So the RDW is the body that gives a license plate in the Netherlands. They wanted to do some extra safety measures because it's this new type of bus with the fuel cell module behind the bus. But they expect to get a license plate by the end of the month, so they can start to train the drivers by next month. Then we go to the Versailles site. In Versailles we have 7 buses in Tree Emotion. They will refuel at the public air liquide station that was realized by the H2ME project for cars, and it's upgraded for the buses. 2 of the buses will be Van Hol buses, and they will be deployed by PTO Savac. They're Ballard fuel cells and will be delivered soon in June 2019. Then we have 5 buses that will be operated by Be Green. They are Safra buses, and then they are the only buses in the Tree Emotion project with the Michelin fuel cell, and they will be delivered in September 2019. Then the Aalborg site. Within the Tree Emotion project, they will realize a new refueling station with an electrolyzer on site. And the buses, 3 buses of Van Hol will start operation in November 2019. And then the last site of the Tree Emotion project is Po. they are realizing a new refueling station, also with electrolyzer on site. And there will be 8 Van Hol XK City buses, and this is also a new type of bus. It's a kind of tram bus. They are 18 meters. 3 buses will be part of the Tree Emotion project, and 5 are part of the Chive project. And the whole transport system will be operational by the end of 2019. But I don't want to talk into detail about that because you get a separate presentation of Melanie Peditour from Po this afternoon. Then quickly some lessons learned. Oh, so 1 minute. So I don't want to talk too much about that. Of course, it's impossible to train the drivers, train the technicians, especially the drivers are very important because they are the ambassadors of the project. And then I just quickly want to talk about the next step into this joint undertaking bus projects. It's a project Chive, and they will deploy over than 300 buses. And they are organizing joint procurement, which makes the price for the buses better. I think Nicolas Brahi from Hydrogénio Europe will tell you more about that. And then, of course, I would like to go to this website, fuelcellbuses.eu. I don't know if you know it already, but it's actually a kind of center of excellence on the fuel cell buses in Europe. So what you can find on this website is like a knowledge base on fuel cell buses, on the concept of fuel cell buses, but also on the hydrogen refueling infrastructure. We try to have all information on the buses on this website. You can find a map. Yeah, I want to go down. Oh, on my computer I have the website, but it's not on the screen. Yeah, anyway, so what you can find on the website is also a map with an overview of all bus projects. You can see where there are buses planned in Europe, where they are operational, and you find a lot of news and events. This website we organized together with High Velocity and Chive, and I kindly invite you to visit it. So that was it for me. I thank you for your attention.
Now moving on to Project I, VLO, City, and Valentin Wilman is presenting.
Thank you. So I'll now continue with the second presentation on fuel cell buses, another fuel cell bus project, High Velocity. So as you've probably heard from Elizabeth's presentation, fuel cell electric buses are really an interesting solution to decarbonize public transport. First of all, of course, they only emit vapor. They enable you to reduce your CO2 emissions from your public transport fleet. They are electric vehicles, so they have reduced noise and vibration level. Passengers and drivers usually really like them. But most importantly, the two most important points is that they have a large range. They do basically or more or less the same numbers of kilometers as a conventional fuel bus. So I was saying two most interesting features of hydrogen buses. They have a very long range, and also you only need to refuel them once per day. The refueling takes about 10 to 12 minutes, so it's very similar to conventional fuel buses. High Velocity is one of the earlier projects funded by the Fuel Cells and Hydrogen Joint Undertaking. The first buses were developed in 2014. At the time we were looking to develop or deploy small fleets of 5 to 10 buses. Now we're moving towards larger scale deployment, but you'll hear more about that in the next presentation. And in the High Velocity project we have deployed a total of 14 buses. The first buses have been deployed at the end of 2014, so they have been in operation for quite a while now, and we can see the first conclusions. We have 4 buses in Aberdeen in Scotland, 2 in Groningen in the northeast of the Netherlands, 5 in Antwerp in Belgium, and 3 in San Remo in Italy. All the buses used in the projects are van-haul buses. They're all the same, but today we have a number of options, a number of manufacturers producing fuel cell buses in Europe. You can also find 18-meter buses, you can find double-decker buses, so the market is really developing now. Before going to the results of the project, I'd like to say a few words about each deployment site and why they actually chose to invest in fuel cell buses and deploy fuel cell buses, because they all have different reasons. In Aberdeen, for instance, they have a much larger vision for hydrogen. They really want to develop a hydrogen economy. It's originally or traditionally an heavily oil and gas based region. They therefore have a lot of skills in the energy sector they can transfer to the hydrogen sector. Scotland also produces a lot of renewable energy. They can therefore produce a lot of green, clean hydrogen. They also have a number of policy drivers in place, both at national level with emission reduction targets, but also at local level. They have a hydrogen strategy for the city and the region. So the bus project for them was really the first stone in this hydrogen strategy, which then enabled them to do a lot of other things with hydrogen in the region. They now have currently 10 buses in operation. It's still the biggest fleet in Europe, and they will scale up as of next year with at least another 15 buses being deployed. Groningen in the northeast of the Netherlands is a bit in a similar situation. They have policy drivers at the national level. You might know that the Dutch government has indicated that as of 2025, all new buses should be clean buses. And if you want zero emission buses, you only have 2 options. You have battery electric buses and you have fuel cell buses. But there are also some local drivers, just like in Aberdeen. It's also a region who traditionally is heavily based on natural gas exploitation. So they also have this larger vision or a bigger vision for hydrogen and the hydrogen economy. So they also have developed the green hydrogen economy strategy. They have 2 fuel cell buses in operation currently, but have big plans for scaling up, and they also have 20 more buses coming in the next few years. In Antwerp, in Belgium, the situation is a bit different. In the project, we're working with the Lane, who is the public transport operator. As the public transport operator, they know that in the future they will have to decarbonize their fleet. It is also an objective of the Flemish government. And therefore, they're trying different technologies. They're trying fuel cell buses, they're trying battery electric buses, and they're trying hybrid buses. And the objective is really to find out which technology is most adapted for which route. So for instance, the fuel cell buses will probably be very useful for them for longer distances, longer lines. And finally, San Remo in Italy. San Remo has a very old trolleybus system in the city, which is fantastic because it's already decarbonized. However, it's a very costly infrastructure to maintain, so they now have to replace all that infrastructure, which would be very expensive. Fuel cell buses are a very interesting solution for them because it's still zero emission, but it's a lot less expensive than replacing all the infrastructure in the city. And it also gives them that additional flexibility of the system because fuel cell buses have a long range and don't need any catenaries. It's an ideal solution for them because the buses are now operating on a suburban line. So each bus drives around 300 kilometers per day and in that case a battery electric bus will not be enough. The different demonstration sites in the project are testing different ways of producing hydrogen as well. The objective, whenever possible, is to use green hydrogen to maximize the decarbonization effects. In Aberdeen and Groningen, the hydrogen is green hydrogen. In Antwerp and in San Remo, it is for the moment industrial byproduct which is used, which is either trucked into the refueling station or linked to the refueling station with a pipeline. The objective of in the long term for San Remo and Antwerp is obviously also to move towards green hydrogen. These are a few figures of what we've achieved so far. We're coming towards the end of the project, so the buses have been driving a lot, accumulating a lot of experience. We have saved a lot of CO2 in the project. The stations have been performing very well. Overall, we have a 97% availability of the stations, which is very good. And the bus availability currently is around 85%. So while this is not at the level of conventional fuel buses, it is still fairly high, and we've seen a lot of progress through the project. And now quickly mentioning a few conclusions we have gathered from this project. First of all, regarding the hydrogen refueling stations. The refueling process takes between 9 and 12 minutes depending on the infrastructure you choose to go for. This is very similar to conventional fuel buses, and it means that the operator doesn't have to change much in the way they are operating their vehicles. We have seen that the refueling stations should, if possible, be located very close to the bus depot, if possible on the bus depot, because it makes it a lot easier for the operators to refuel the buses. The technology is mature, it's highly reliable. We've also seen in the project that stations are more efficient if they're used at full capacity. So if you use more or less all the hydrogen which is produced by the station daily. And refueling stations can also relatively easily be scaled up. So it is quite a big investment initially, but then once you have your initial infrastructure in, it's relatively easy to add buses and to grow your fleet without having to add another big infrastructure. Moving on to lessons learned about the buses. We had a very good customer acceptance of the buses in the project, so both the passengers and the drivers really enjoyed the buses. We have seen that fuel cell buses need to have special equipped workshop. So when you plan for your fuel cell buses project, don't forget that your workshop as well needs to be adapted for these buses. There are a few slight changes to be made. Technical assistance on site for the buses should be optimal, so make sure that your staff is really well trained before the start of the project, but also once your buses are in operation. And another thing to keep an eye on is the supply chain. The supply chain is still developing because we don't have that many of these buses on the roads currently, so you need to make sure that you have an efficient supply chain in place, so that usually means having a few spare parts on site, so that you can access these spare parts relatively rapidly if something goes wrong with the bus. And finally, maybe the last lesson learned would be to introduce fuel cell buses smoothly. It's a new technology, and as with any new technology, it can create some operational stress. So don't introduce them from one day to another, but introduce them smoothly, keep everyone involved, all the stakeholders engaged, think about training, and hopefully it should be relatively easy to then introduce a new technology in your fleet. This is the end of my presentation, but as Lisbeth already mentioned, we have a number of websites and other material available for you to use on the internet, so don't hesitate to consult our website and social media, and our contact details are also there if you wish to have a more detailed conversation about buses. Thank you.
Okay, and now moving on to the last presentation before lunch, which is on the transition to zero emission mobility by Professor Carmen Rangel.
Thank you very much. Good morning to you all. Shall we start? Okay, thank you once more. So we'll start from the beginning and from the framework of sustainability and the dependence of fossil fuels and how hydrogen fits the equation, since we have tackled climate change, air quality and energy security, introducing more energy, renewable sources, proposing non-polluting energy vector and increasing the energy efficiency. And the hydrogen energy transition enables the large-scale efficient utilization and integration of renewable energy, and is distributed along a tremendous number of sectors and regions, including, of course, industry, heating and cooling, electricity, and transportation. Apart from that, adds a buffer to increase resilience of the whole energy system. So the flexibility to storage capability is good to emphasize. Being produced by primary sources or regionally prevalent is important for regions and for countries, and critical increase in the renewables in the energy mix, it will allow this enabling at large scale, as we said. So what is the top priority in the energy transition? Obviously, is the reduction of greenhouses, keeping the average decreased global temperature well below 2 degrees according to the Paris Agreement. Requires rethinking the way we live, produce and consume energy. Transport, of course, is a central issue, and we have all seen as growing demand for transport has outpaced any realized efficiency gain. Primary electricity converted to non-pollutant energy carriers, of course, is a top priority, and electricity stored and made accessible to other applications. But it is the integration of mobility in the energy transition and implementation of sustainable alternative to electricity-based transportation that perhaps will do the trick. So we have our challenges in urban mobility, but also the challenges in the energy system. Those two have to be coupled, so that the dependence on fossil fuels and the unsustainable pollution that we have marries, let's say, the growing energy consumption and the integration of renewable energy sources in order to have this energy transition. So the technology, we can say, is ready, but needs to be demonstrated in real environments. And for Portugal, the next decade is a decade of larger scale demonstration, especially in transport and in hydrogen production technologies. So in hydrogen production technologies, we can see here from fossil to water or to solar, and we emphasize, let's say, all the barriers that have to be overcome, from CO2 capture technologies and purification systems, for example, when we talk about methane steam reforming, or when we talk about biomass gasification, reducing the cost of the preparation of biomass and CCS. But also in the water-based technology and lower high temperature, we have to increase the current densities and increase the capacity of stacking in the multi-watts or multi-megawatts scale. That is very important, and of course to continue the research to produce solar hydrogen. That's from the point of view of the technologies. So we talk a little bit about the readiness and capital requirements for this hydrogen technology, and just have pinpointed or underlined there PM electrolysis, both also alkaline and also the fuel cell technology. And as you can see, this bell-shaped curve gives us a good indication of the capital requirement that is necessary for these hydrogen technologies, and also associated to the technology maturity. So we can see also here, let's say, emphasize the technologies that are actually material of 9, and the others that still have a long way to go. So with these two, the technologies that we have been talking about, water electrolysis and stream methane reforming. I present here some data from the water electrolysis dominant scenario, which will be possible if drops in the cost of electrolysis and the renewable electricity continue to go down. And the scenario with steam methane reforming or reforming of fossil fuels will be actually dominant, for example, during the first period, if CCS is feasible and it is politically accepted. But water electrolysis has its advantages, apart from the ones that we talked. For example, I'm showing here results recently published by NEREL, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory from the States. And that's the first ever validation of frequency regulation with electrolysis. It's quite an important result because the laboratory testing shows a dynamic response within seconds and potential for grid services. This is an important result for water electrolysis and for forward their implementation as ancillary services. So we continue trying to advance in the research for green hydrogen via renewable water electrolysis in order to be able to make the cost of hydrogen having this objective of water electrolysis, whether with renewable electricity and also biomass gasification to have this objective in terms of cost, whether they are distributed or centralized in the case of electrolysis. So with the large potential of these industrial developments and the existence of the technology-based capability, large-scale demonstration projects are possible, and Portugal is in the line for that, even if we have lack of normative and no, let's say, no national infrastructure or manufacturers for electrolysis and components. But the scientific community is ready in terms of researching into the design of electrolyzers and the development of advanced materials, and also in implementing system and testing platforms and advancing concepts for coupling with transient loads and in benchmarking with systems installed in Europe, and also obviously in the identification of partners for development in order to engage in more meaningful large projects. So some of the research that Portuguese researchers are engaging is in the electrocatalyst for transportation. This electrocatalyst for transportation is very important, even though the advance that we have in the last few years, because it is to this transportation, it is from this electrocatalyst for transportation that the fuel cells really have enjoyed a decrease in the cost of more than 60% in the last few years, and has increased 4 times durability. So it's quite important now that we are very near to commercialization. So there is a consistent growth potential global market, and that is due to this progress in R&D. So some of the challenges for the scientific community, as was mentioned by Pedro this morning, we are still engaged in maximizing the use of catalysts and minimizing the noble metal content of these catalysts, and in developing new membranes for these PEM fuel cells that will present higher conductivity and require more mechanical, chemical and thermal stability, so that we can increase the life of these devices. So for the mobility in Portugal, the priority action will focus in demonstration projects, in defining the supply chain, and also focus on obtaining some kind of infrastructure, optimizing also the initial fueling infrastructure in order to be able to run the buses and to run demonstration for mobility. In the framework of regions, as we saw, are very, let's say, engaging and promoting the demonstration projects. And the question is, are we engaging in components for fuel cells in terms of national technology? Are we developing in the integration and components of auxiliary systems, which are quite necessary, as it was talked before, in order to complete some kind of value chain or some kind of supply chain for these demonstrations. What are the issues and questions that we thought? Is the transition technologically feasible over the time period where it can help Europe to meet the Paris climate objectives? That's important, that this transition actually will be focused on time and on delivery time for these objectives. What is the impact on the transition? What are the emissions? What are the energy savings? What is the air quality that we are going to achieve? As we saw this morning, there is a present with time so that we can do something very meaningful in this decade in order to be able to impact this transition and follow these objectives. What are the savings in terms of total demand, total energy demand for the passenger vehicles fleet? What impact will the transition will have on the economy? That's very important. What is the level of infrastructure and related investment needed to make the transition possible? And what will the national electricity distribution system be impacted with? How much additional electricity will be required to fuel a large fleet of vehicles for a large demonstration? So those are some issues and questions that I think it will help to guide the transition. Obviously, there is a lot of modeling work going on, and perhaps we have seen a lot of them with different results. Some of them based on cost, some of them based in other parameters, and we have over here some results for these that we have done with a preliminary and still to validate modeling using LEAP, long range energy alternative systems, and one of the things is that with this modeling, for example, import of fossil fuels will decrease 51% in comparison with 2015, for example, so that we can see this the import of fossil fuels in terms of time, and we will see let's say the reference line in blue and the rest in other colors. So this is done. We would like to probably share after this work is validated a document in the website of Project Poseur with this data later on. But then this is done saying, let's say that for 2040 there will be no new sales of vehicles using the internal combustion engine. For example, and that you will fix a quota of these vehicles, for example, in 2050 of 10%. And the rest, for example, would be vehicles of electric powertrain, divided between, for example, electric vehicles with batteries and electric vehicles with fuel cells. So we intend to continue with this work and to produce some data in order to answer these questions that we made before for the transition. So minimizing the use of fossil fuel energy and maximizing the use of renewables using hydrogen as an energy vector is the objective for this period of transition. And as a final remark, I would like just to emphasize that a more adequate value chains for hydrogen implementation in Portugal has to be defined, and that the case is a case for demo, especially for mobility and its interaction with the energy system, and robust networks of the learning of green hydrogen, large-scale production, storage and distribution, and the most efficient technologies of conversion have to be implemented, and we are identifying the areas of national technology development in this area and creating action for the increase of literacy about hydrogen, as well as contributing to defining what is the regulatory framework for the implementation of these technologies. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you for people presenting with such interesting presentations. Hopefully in the afternoon we will have some time to present questions and discuss possible answers. For now, as we are running very, very late, I will just invite you to be back at 3 o'clock, and for those who are having lunch here, the lunch is served. See you.
Okay.